coalition for resource recovery is the waste-related division. We call ourselves CORE, which I think always makes us sound like a heavy metal band. And as I mentioned, we mainly do pilots, and we work mostly with the private sector. We don't do a ton of advocacy. Mostly what we try to do is try out different systems. As a nonprofit, we sort of absorb some risk, bringing two companies together, sometimes competing companies, to try out different methods of reducing waste or diverting waste. So we work with a number of different sorts of folks. In this case, particularly cities is kind of the main focus for this project. This is just an infographic that I love because basically it shows that we're essentially applying the scientific method here. So we're looking at a waste stream and we're saying, okay, how can we address some aspect of diverting this? We develop a hypothesis, we get companies together who are involved in that infrastructure in some way. So we kind of build support while we're doing this testing so that the idea is that the more this process goes, the more support we get overall in terms of getting the companies who are actually making these decisions to participate in this down the line. So food scrap recovery, big issue. This is sort of getting back to the EPA statistics we talked about earlier. So if we got to 100% diversion, it would be the equivalent of shutting down 7 coal-fired power plants, which is pretty sweet. And that's a lot of nutrients that are also going to landfill that could be used for something better. So multifamily buildings are often considered kind of the most difficult nut to crack. So that's partly why we've been looking at that here in particular. In other areas of the country, we're actually looking more at infrastructure, but that's less the issue around here, right? We do have some infrastructure, so then the next question becomes, how do we deal with it when there's not that financial incentive? If you're a tenant, you don't necessarily see those savings directly when you divert. So it's a sort of different situation. So the question we were looking at for this project in particular was, what are the diversion outcomes associated with certain best practices? So I'll get into that in a minute. So it's sort of in 3 phases. We partnered with the city of Albany. 4 buildings. So this is basically a focus group. This is very small scale, just kind of beta testing the methodology at this point. We're going to be ramping it up, hopefully pretty soon, to expand to new cities, but I'll get to that later. And so we then worked with Stop Waste to identify the buildings that really, are getting on board with putting out the green cart, and we wanted to coordinate our outreach with that. And then we worked with the property managers also to make sure that they are all aware of what was going on. So we did outreach, we surveyed the residents before we actually deployed the cart, saying, have you done this before? What is your interest in this? Getting a sense of how many people live in each household, that kind of thing. And there's going to be a larger report on this later, so if you have any questions about specific results, by the way, just be aware, keep an eye out for that later. Not everything is going to be in this PowerPoint, sadly. So we did some before waste audits for the building, before the green cart was even put out. So the idea was to get a snapshot of what's the trash and recycling, and then look at later, once the green cart's been added, how does that increase the diversion rate overall. And then we distributed kitchen pails and water-resistant paper bags, which is a very unusual thing, and they're a little interesting. I have a sample with me if anybody's interested. Those were donated by Orbis, and Bag to Earth is the name of the company that makes the paper bags. And they are actually water resistant, and they are actually all paper, which is kind of cool. So I can talk more about that later if you like, or catch me later. Last phase, we surveyed residents about their experience with the program. We did after waste audits to get the sort of diversion results overall. Results. We reached about 85% of residents, but again, there was a total of only 54 households. So again, focus group. This is just to kind of give you relative values of these different things. But as we continue to expand, we'll hopefully get more accurate and useful statistics down the line. 90% of respondents weren't participating, but there was only one household that was really just like, no, composting is dumb. Pretty much everyone else was just like, I don't understand what this is. There was a few different languages that we didn't include in the outreach. We did English, Spanish, and Korean, but we definitely should have included Tagalog and Farsi and Hindi. Lesson learned. 12% of participants were emptying their pail every day, which meant they used up their bags really fast. So that was another interesting tidbit. We were expecting them to empty 2 or 3 times a week, and that was sort of average, but there were some people who were doing it a lot faster. 14%, so not a whole lot, but a goodly proportion of folks were like, why can't we use plastic bags? Which, as in this case, it was because they don't processed properly at the composting facility nearby, but it was a sort of notable statistic. Everybody liked using the bag or the pail. Nobody was just not using either that we talked to. So most people were using both. They were putting the bag in the pail. A couple of households were using just the pail, but the bag seemed to be something that people really, really liked. So that was interesting. They liked them in terms of odor, leakage, ease of use. All of those they considered the pail and the bag to be very useful for all those things. We got a few interesting ideas from the residents too. They wanted a set of paper bag and pail that might go together better. In this case, they're made by two different companies, as I mentioned, so they weren't designed to fit together. Actually, a few different folks suggested this idea of a multi-chambered bin. And I think our friend from Sierra Nevada mentioned this too, of sort of giving a sense of what those proportions should look like, sort of big bin for recycling, smaller bin for compost, smallish bin for trash, to kind of give people a sense of, oh, in fact, most things are recoverable. And then a lot of people were putting their bin down low, and the pails are not made with the foot pedals. They were like, I can't open my bin. So that was an interesting tidbit too. They're designed to go on your countertop, but most people didn't really actually want to do that. And the other thing is they wanted the bags to be available sort of like on a dispenser basis, which is a process that's used by a couple of different companies, EcoSafe sort of most notably, where they have a dispenser that's paid for by the property manager, so the tenants can just get bags all the time. That was not the case in this case, and it's actually kind of a rare setup, so that was what people seem to like that idea. Okay, so the audit results. As we mentioned before, there's still a lot of recoverables going in the landfill. Bad news. There was a lot of recycling happening, and maybe potentially more than the service level could handle. That was what we heard was sort of the perception, but when we did these audits, we also found that the bins were almost always full to overflowing. So there's a lot of recyclables being generated, more potentially than is being recovered. There's a lot of e-waste, textiles, construction demolition, bulky items, all going into the dumpster. So whether there's service available for that or not, people are perceiving that that's available. So that was something we were hoping to address down the line. Increased in overall diversion, contamination rates were not bad. In the control buildings, the contamination rates were also not bad, which was interesting too. Even in places where there's not a lot of outreach, the people who were participating, participation rates were lower, but the people who were participating were still doing a good job. So that was pretty interesting. Trash overall reduced by 7%, but that was actually more total pounds than the 7% that was the organics. Okay, so last slide. Woo! We're going to expand into additional cities. We're also going to be expanding on the methodology, in particular including a food waste reduction element. So far we were just talking about the diversion part and giving them tools for diversion. For example, that recycling issue I mentioned, if there's not enough service for recycling, the sensor will say, oh my gosh, the recycling bin is full after day 2 or whatever, so you can get a sense of whether that's happening or not. And also down the line, eventually we'll get to a point where we're looking at the economic returns for making these investments in more enhanced outreach and engagement in terms of increased diversion rates overall. And that's it. That's it for me.
Does anybody have any questions for Lily?
Oh yeah, good point. You can find me afterwards for a card. It's also lkelly@globalgreen.org, so super logical.
Any other questions? Yes.
Can you talk about the role that property managers played? Were they active? They talked with it, or was it all they took a step back?
They took a step back. They were helpful. I mean, they were amenable to it. They would say, yeah, sure, we'll let you in when you need to go in and do the audits, do the outreach. We're interested in the results. They were sort of neutral about the program in general. They were like, okay, we want to abide by the law. That's good, but that's about the extent of it. So that's partly why we want to get at that economic factor and be able to say, this is actually going to benefit you down the line. So yeah, that's about where they lay on that.
Are you planning to do follow-up studies to see how well they do in a year or so?
Yeah. Definitely. So we're sticking with these buildings in addition to expanding to kind of see how they survive down the line. And actually getting to the property manager thing too, we're also going to be working with those property managers to give them tools to give to tenants when they enter the building. So during that lease signing process when they're getting through the rules of the building, we're hoping to give some resources for that as well so the landlords can say, here's how you do it.
There's you in the back.
So what kind of outreach was here with the getting the sales? Was it, did you guys give them a flyer, or did you like show them how to use the green?
So many flyers.
Was it flyer?
All of the above. So it was, we gave them a kit that consisted of a bunch of bags, two per week for 8 weeks supply. So it's like this big stack of bags. The pail, 3 or 4 different flyers. Without too much overlap, they were all pretty different. Some were about the bag, some were about the program in Alameda County specifically, and then some were just information about why composting is a good idea. So those were, as I said, in a few different languages, but not many, not enough, you know. And there was some demonstration as well. Actually, one thing we did that worked really well was we would get a tenant, and this was kind of lucky too. There was a tenant in each building that ended up being kind of like a champion, and this wasn't even planned. They were just like, oh, I want to go around with you and introduce you to my neighbors, and so they actually ended up doing a lot of the demonstration. You'd be like, hey, check this out. You put the bag in like this, you can fold it over like that, and so that was actually, I think, more effective than if it had just been like us being like, hey, we're an environmental group, and here's how you do it. So it was pretty cool.
You in the back.
Pilot. I don't know if you said that if I missed it. Who funded the pilot?
So it was partly funded by philanthropic funds, and partly by Orbis and Back to Earth, who donated the equipment.
Any more questions? Oh, 2 in the back.
How many units were in each building?
So there was it was a variety. So we did some that were 8, and some that were, the largest was 26.
And how many floors?
I think there were 3 in the largest building. 3 floors, 26 units. So again, not large. I mean, that's why we're expanding, because this is sort of, again, sort of a beta test, focus group kind of scale. When we get to a larger number, we're going to be testing it in hundreds of buildings, or hundreds of unit type buildings. So it'll be more interesting then.
Last question.
Did any property managers or residents express concern about how long the bags supply would last?
Yeah, all of them. I mean, they all wanted more bags. So actually, Bags to Earth is in the process now of trying to figure out how they can channel more bags into this area, because it seems to be a really useful thing for places that can't handle compostable plastics, right? So they're working with retailers, and we'll see what happens. I can't get too involved in that, obviously, because it's a nonprofit, so that's their business. But we tested the bags and we found that they worked, and so that was the main outcome we were hoping for.
If any of you have extra questions, you can ask Lily later after our break. Thank you, Lily, again.